Hi, I'm Igor Vitale, psychologist, and I give you my welcome to 1 Minute May Save a Life project. In this lesson, I explain you the first module of this course called Psychology, Safety, Security and Risk. Human, throughout history, has always been exposed to hazards and risks in all areas of his life. This was certainly an evolution in human history, including the meaning of the word risk, which over the centuries has undergone profound changes. In the Middle Ages, a time when the term began to be widely grown by foundation of shipping companies, taking into account risk pre-modern relativity, the word risk meant only the possibility of a dangerous object, act of God, or another danger that does not involve wrong human behavior. In practice, that period excluded the possibility of error of human responsibility. With the transition to modernity, risk involved a new meaning, which contributed to the spread of new ways of understanding and representation of the world. The chaos of unforeseen events and uncertainties. Such factors they held responsible, and human behavior took place to those that was previously attributed to luck, fate, or other external entities. Since then, human began to take account unforeseen and adverse events, as well as the possible consequences of human actions. Taking the concept of risk, therefore, gradually extended and now applies to a wide variety of situations. But there is still no unanimity in the assessment and interpretation, in particular the influence of risk in one's life. Often, people have attitudes that do not always correspond to the actual impact of the hazard of the risk perception, does not correspond to his rational evaluation. To verify the reason for these are useful, first it's important to make a conceptual distinction between the term risk and danger from a technical standpoint. The word danger identifies agent, situation, event capable of causing damage. Can be dangerous car, landslide, storm, etc. Risk means the probability of injury in producing event according to the vulnerability of the system and value of the property potentially affected. This technical probabilistic view of risk concept is inadequate, or at least incomplete, as typically risk is not a single observable product of probability of an event, but it's also affected by subjective evaluation or perception of the individual or his social group. There is a widespread belief, namely that security is the responsibility of others, state, doctors, police, institution. However, the person itself should be the first responsible for its own safety and for others. Internationally, there are three terms to define this concept, namely safety, security, and emergency. Safety refers to security of person, for example, prevention or accident. Safety must be understood not only as referencing to physical damage, but also moral, spiritual, and indirect. Security has a cultural significance, educational and management for the implementation of preventive measures, the implementation of information security measure confidential or secret. These measures may be material or infrastructure, especially training and information designed to raise awareness of the risk and therefore to avoid danger. Emergency refers to protecting and limiting danger. Structures involved in emergency are emergency dispatchers, police, fire departments, first aid, and civil protection. In Romania, there is General Inspectorate for Emergency, a system that works very well, created by Dr. Raed Arafat. Until 2004, civil protection measures and firefighting were made by the Inspectorate General of Military Firefighters and Civil Protection Command, institutions under the coordination of Ministry of Interior. To adapt to the exponential growth of non-military risks on background of globalization trends, radical climate change, diversification of economic activities that lead to disasters, the two mentioned institutions merged in December 2004, being established by the General Inspectorate for Emergency Situations. The fundamental objective of the work done by IGSU aimed in improving the prevention and management of emergencies in order to maintain risk control and ensure normal state of human life for communities, and it's achieved throughout many activities of prevention and intervention, firefighting, extrication, and first aid of SMURD, rescue people and limit to damage caused by floods, landslide, earthquake, epidemics, episodic snow, drought assistance to person in critical situation, intervention to technological accidents, radiological, nuclear, biological, or other types of natural disasters or human. General Inspectorate and country structures are made up of 43 operating centers and 280 operative subunits with over 3,500 technical means of intervention. The 30,000 staff engage 97% of operating units and 3% administrative structures, schools, studies and research bases, workshops, and technical supply depots, logistics and repairs. Recruitment is assured by dedicated training institutions: Police Academy, Alexandru Ioan Cuza, University of Bucharest, Department of Fire and of School Fire and Civil Protection Pavel Zaganescu Boldești. As an integrator of the National System of Management of Emergency Situation, created in 2004, IGSU coordinates the institution involved in emergency management, ensuring the function of a national point of contact in relation to international governmental and non-governmental responsibilities in the field. National Management System for Emergency Situations was established before the accession of Romania to the European Union and represents a network of permanent communication between the public authorities and organizations qualified for emergency management, built on levels and areas of expertise and available infrastructure and resource to reduce the loss of life and response to various types of emergencies. The system is composed of the National Committee for Emergency Situations, national, ministerial, Bucharest municipality, county and local, General Inspectorate for Emergency Situations has an integrative role, providing transmission of decisions taken by government and by national committee to the central authorities and local government. Professional community public services for emergency situation, county inspectorates for emergency. Operational emergency centers, permanent or temporary, are to be established within ministries and other institutions of the system to ensure the flow of information before or at the time of the emergency. Commander of Action provides uniform coordination of the site of the exceptional event. For emergency management, IGSU and county authorities fulfill mission as monitoring, evaluation, research the causes of emergency, preventive information and education of the population and its warning, notification to government authorities about the possibility imminent emergencies, search, extrication and rescue persons, evacuation of people and property endangered by measures ensuring evacuation, installation in victim camps, participation in public transport and certain categories of goods, destruction of ice formation or clearance rates of water, emergency medical care throughout SMURD modules and the professional emergency services. Logistics provision of assistance and making available their own structures or other structure for certain categories of technical equipment and firefighting equipment. Decontamination of people with special means and or points of personal decontamination. Technical and equipment recognized early in territorial. Neutralizing the effects of hazardous materials through actions, reclamation and exploded ammunition during military conflicts. In the County Inspectorates for Emergency Function, the Emergency Medical Service for Resuscitation and Excitation, SMURD, working with the Air Carrier Aviation structures of the Interior Ministry in cooperation with county hospitals, regional and local authorities. The integrated team structure works SMURD extrication, reanimation, specialized technical assistance, and emergency medical and paramedical staff teams specializing in first aid qualified. SMURD missions are the intervention in cases where one or more people is in a life-threatening situation due to an acute illness or injury. Intervention in cases requiring the provision of first aid in a short period of time. Intervention in cases requiring extrication or other rescue operations. Medical personnel providing protection intervention through mission IGSU specific risk of injury. Intervention in collective accident and disasters. Continuing with the definition needed to comprehend a better understanding of what constitutes emergency or how a 112 dispatcher faces every day with this concept during work. Hazard is the intrinsic property of a factor, equipment, materials, labor practices to cause damage. Is characterized by frequency of occurrence, severity, and consequences of the danger. Damage. Physical injury to person through direct or indirect exposure to danger. Definition of risk is in addition to the above. Analysis is the statistical study on the question, elements and activities taking place in order to produce a risk assessment. Prevention. Implementation and exercise of all measures derived from analysis to prevent hazardous events. Protection is the installation and commissioning of all measures to protect person and property. Individual and collective protection is active or passive. Collective protection measures have priority over individual. Active protection is the same. Operators must activate prepared helmets, shoes, fire extinguishers, while passive intervention is without human control. An example is the fire sprinkler system. Management is the set of activities taking place in both phases, both normal and critical ones. Management during normal operation is the set of activities such as training, information, maintenance, inspection, and regulatory procedures. Emergency management involves the implementation of protections, therefore discharges, emergency containment, closure of disposal. Risk is the probability of a given event characterized by a certain severity of damage to people, property, and or the environment. I will insist more on the concept of risk as is having the largest share in production of emergency situation and is also an element that can be influenced by education and human behavior, thus minimizing emergencies. Now we will study the classification of risks. There are risks that can be eliminated. For example, someone who has a risk in consumption of dangerous substances may waive their use or replace them with substances that are less harmful. There are reducible risks, for example, delimiting areas of access to certain areas dangerous for avoiding damages. If a building collapses, people are banned there. Residual risks. For example, a person who is aware of the risk of there is something suspicious in a bag left at random and without a caregiver, waive any action to call the authorities and is not responsible, thinking in sounds else. Transferable risk, for example, when a person sees a pole crashed and tells another person in the street to go to place it up, not to hurt anyone, hence transferring responsibility to others. Then we have another classification in terms of typology danger. Conventional risks. Example of conventional risks are electrical, heating and technological, status of the installations, architectural barriers. Then we have specific risks in relation to the presence of certain specific physical, chemical and biological. Examples of specific risks are physical agents like noise, vibration and radiation, chemical agents, vapors, fumes, liquids and gases, biological agents like bacteria and viruses, etc. Then we have risk of organizational deficiency, come from an ineffective organization of work, so in terms of management, both methodologically and in terms of operations. Some examples are the absence of internal procedures, the lack of involvement of employees at all levels, lack of methodology, no clear assignment of responsibility, and insufficient training information. We have estimated risk. The qualitative estimation of risk is based on conceptual evaluation of two elements: the likelihood of an event harmful, the magnitude of the consequences, so the extent of damage, and the expert judgment about awareness of quality information. Let's see now the definition of safety and the psychology of safety. Safety concept, individual as each of us perceive it, is different from security. It's very important to consider security as a service rather than an active strategy. Safety is employee safety and security is the safety of citizens. Safety can be defined as the knowledge that the evolution of a system will not produce anything undesirable and knowledge that a particular action will not cause damage. The system can evolve without damage, but in any case cannot be considered safe. Only through scientific knowledge based on repeated observations and organized to ensure a meaningful assessment of safety. Only through scientific knowledge based on repeated observation and organized to ensure a meaningful assessment of safety. We can talk about total security in the absence of danger. In an absolute sense, it's a concept difficult to translate in real life. Even if the application of safety standards makes it harder, the occurrence of adverse events and incidents then always translate into a better quality of life. Life every day or work of an organized system to improve security, to reduce the risk of accident and incident while increasing the likelihood to resolve favorably any emergency, it takes appropriate measures to prevent, such as the risk analysis, training of persons engaged in security, organize a proper intervention involving act of leading to safety, first aid training, organization, appropriate equipment like clothing, personal protective equipment, monitoring devices, remote sensing and remote assistance, first aid equipment. Periodic monitoring of detection like gas, fire, weapons, explosives and or other aggressive products, escape routes, evacuation plane risks. Periodic monitoring of electrical equipment with special reference to the overload and for the effectiveness of the dispersion and the verification procedure. Periodic monitoring of filters and air vents in the ventilation and air conditioning. Let's study now the lesson about perception of risk. Risk perception in different variables to personal or socio-cultural depends on how people relate to specific situation, information about an event, dangerous, benchmarks, tracking of individuals or social groups. Therefore, perception is subjective, like about driving a car that is considered less dangerous than flying by plane, while car accident cause more deaths and has more risk than for flight. An unknown situation, such as a biological attack, is perceived as more dangerous than the most common and ordinary action like crossing the street. Emergency dispatchers should consider these aspects in order to have a proper communication at risk, alarm, and emergency that is not focused only on technical aspects, but it can help more understand and interpret phenomena and dynamics behind risk. Knowledge and risk awareness is the first step to safety. Often, the individual or community are aware of the presence of certain risks because they have been informed about them. Yet, what is often missing, perception awareness, is a real risk. It's important to understand the correct risk because there's avoidable errors. It's important to understand the correct risk because there's avoidable errors considered in the first criterion of security. Also, knowledge and awareness is the first step to safety. Risk is processed by our cognitive system in two ways, analytically and experientially. Risk is processed by our cognitive system in two ways, analytically and experientially. It's true that an accurate perception of risk is that the experience is very important, but it's difficult a task as experiment as that of driving a car drunk to see how it's perceived a risky situation. It can therefore be important for the staff involved in emergency situation. Knowledge of mechanism involved in the perception of risk, involving core psychological mechanism. Generally, the human mind tends to consider a situation most risky. Those who have more severe, for example, condition that can lead to death, while tending to assess how situations less risky situations are associated with lower severity, such situations that cause bodily harm. Another psychological mechanism that changes the perception of risk is the direct involvement of persons in emergency situations and risk. For example, a dispatcher 112 can evaluate different if emerging. For example, a dispatcher 112 can evaluate different if emergency involving one of his family members or is a stranger. Perception is the mechanism by which we achieve, without sensory system integration, understanding of the world around us comparable to an accurate reproduction. Metaphorically speaking, our perception will function as a camcorder. But things are not so. Perception is a process of interpretation and construction according to the principle of making sense of events. Perception works with the selection filter stimuli that detect senses. These stimuli reach our sensory system is the entire flow of information from the outside and from the inside, internal perception. If the mind could process all details that we receive from the outside, people will die. It will be as if we were on fire. The mind cannot consciously use all their senses, visually, auditory, olfactory, tactile, and gustatory. Therefore, it needs a selection which is determined by several factors, varying according to time and circumstances. Factors affecting the selection of stimuli that come to us through the senses, there are health and fatigue and individual interest, intrinsic motivation, or based on the social context of the time, extrinsic motivation. It is also important to understand the perception acts as some cognitive models previously developed by the individual. If a person's mind is not ready to observe detail, it will be difficult to observe, although this detail can be an important aspect of the situation. In other words, people retain what they see, hear, feel, smell, touch, just what is important to them. Other information reaches the subconscious. When an emergency dispatcher talks to someone on the phone claiming an emergency, it is important to consider this mechanism of perception of a person, which can distort the information they give without being aware that doing this. These arguments have great importance in hazard perception. The emergency dispatcher must know what to look for, categories of observation, but we must also remember that we humans have a tendency to see simple and regular configuration. Therefore, in some cases, details like conversation with a person in a state of crisis, emergency, or scenes details of an environment where something happens be overlooked. Knowing this about the mechanism of perception, we understand that does not lead directly to perceive the dangers, and even less all perils. As mentioned above, humans perceive danger through two mechanisms. First, logically, analytically, with the neocortex. This kind of working is slow and requires a high cognitive engagement, therefore is not suitable when you need to make a quick decision. The second way is, however, fast and appear automatically. According to research, it would seem that these pathways associated with emotional reaction that are associated with risk. People helped by experience create some memory connection between risk and associated emotion, thus creating an automatic process of reaction to danger. Hazard information has an impact on our behavior unless they create image in our minds emotionally charged. This process of creating an image is influenced by characteristics it has dangerous situations. For this reason, the study of how people perceive danger is particularly important to understand how individuals experience it. The first scientific studies on risk perception and danger were conducted by Starr in 1979. In the next lesson, we'll study the common opinion regarding risk, because this will help us in understand more about psychology of risks. In most cases, when the perception of safety and security is not in line with objective reality, it's because there is a misperception of risk. Generally, we pay much attention to minor risks and not enough to what is really important. We do not make a proper assessment of the risk, and this can happen because 1. People tend to overestimate spectacular but rare risks and underestimate common risks. People are often in difficulties before estimating risk if not fit into their daily reality. Personal risks are perceived as more dangerous than risk of others. People underestimate risks they consider that they could control and overestimate risk in situations they cannot control directly. People overestimate risks that is gone about more and remain under the public eye. An important role is also maximizing or minimizing the price of cases presented as dramatic, although are not so, or vice versa. Many people are concerned about the risks that are new. For example, in summer of 1999, New Yorkers were seriously afraid of the West Nile virus, which caused an infection caused by a mosquito. Nowadays, although the virus continues to cause disease, fear disappeared. The risk is present, but New York have learned to live with it. That became common threat and changed their perception of risk. Many people fear less natural risk than artificial one. The fear radiation contamination from nuclear or mobile in relation to solar radiation, which is actually a greater risk. People fear most what they cannot control. They are less afraid than when driving their own car than sitting on the passenger seat or when flying by plane. People are more concerned about the risks that are more aware than the risks they care less. In late 2001, awareness of terrorism was so great that fear was rampant, while fear of street crime and climate change and other such risks decreased, not because there were not any, but because the degree awareness for the latter declined. Adults are more concerned about the risks that affect their children rather than those of the children of others. Let's see the new lesson about communication risk. Communication risk can be defined as the exchange of information of assessment of risk between experts, public administration, media, interest groups, and citizens, which ends with decision to reduce or avoid risk. Main goals of risk communication are improving and changing information about hazard emerged or whose occurrence is expected, on risk or pressure risk, changing risky behavior of people at risk, promoting community participation in mitigating risk, facilitate cooperation, developing a culture for disaster readiness and crisis management. Means or channels of communication used in this situation are many such prints distributed to institutions, information and instruction on using the best products, technology and means of protection, public information services, hotlines crisis, education products information disseminated through the media, presentation, expert sessions and meeting warning system. The risk evaluation for the average person on the street and 112 dispatchers or an expert is different. The first is influenced by factors such as the perception of emergency and seriousness of its consequences. The second is influenced by the probability to verify the situation. This lesson is called Brain and Response to Risk. The human brain is a fascinating organ, but equally certain mechanisms that come from ancient times may conflict with the new mechanisms acquired during evolution and thus cause absolute chaos. Given that evolved over millions of years of number of functions and its processes stemming from the appearance of the human species are not organized logically. Some processes are optimized only occasionally, while others do not work on outstanding conditions. And sometimes some functions come in conflict. The most important thing for human being is undoubtedly to be able to evaluate and respond appropriately to risk. There is a very primitive part of the brain that is involved in such activity, namely the amygdala, a region located on the right side of the brain. The amygdala is
amygdala, amygdala,
There is a very primitive part of the brain that is involved in such activity, namely the amygdala, a region located on the right side of the brain. The amygdala is responsible for processing basic emotions, which are seven and being involved in the survival of the species. The seven primary emotions are fear, anger, contempt, disgust, joy, surprise, sadness, occurring from the interaction of sensory stimuli, such as darkness, flying, defensive situation, and fear. The old part of the brain was shown for the first time to fish. When an animal or a human feels or perceives something that could be a potential danger, the amygdala is what reacts immediately to produce adrenaline and other specific hormones and send them to the bloodstream, leading to the setting fight-or-run mechanism, in which psychological changes occur, which translate into visible changes in behavior of animals or person in danger, such as increased heart rate, increased blood in the muscles, sweating hands, throat. This type of reaction is the same for a lizard, for a lion or a human. The animal needs a response as soon as possible, fast enough to recognize and remove the threat quickly, or conversely to decide to fight, thus ensuring survival of the species. But nowadays, human behavior has become more complicated. There is an advantage, in evolutionary terms, to develop the ability to not immediately give a type or fight or run response, but to deepen in the analysis of the situation and the various options to manage it. Of course, in terms of human evolution has developed different behavior towards animals, when they have to consider the risk and danger, because the human brain has a part which is not present in animals, which is called the cerebral cortex, which sits more and more advanced brain developed more recently. Of course, when I say recently, I mean thousands of years in our evolution. The cerebral cortex, therefore, is intelligent and analytical. It can think, but it's slower. Hence, the first fundamental problem that we have two systems to respond to the risk of danger. An intuitive primitive reptilian brain located in a more advanced analytical system that operates in parallel. Cortex is, however, very difficult to contradict the amygdala, with priority instant mechanism to avoid danger, to ensure the survival and taking action thereafter as reappears the phenomenon that led to the perception of danger or merged with it. Even if the danger has passed or not, it's not to appear the reptilian brain primitive goes into action. In his book Mind Wide Open, Steven Johnson described very well the mechanism. He refers to an accident while he and his wife were sitting at home an evening. A large window broke during a storm. He was right next to the window and felt the wind whistling in its ears. When the window was open and broken, he was lucky. If it was a few centimeters below, we were dead. Memory of the wind sound did not desert him, although he understood that the window was broken because it was installed incorrectly. Even if after this event installed windows that can withstand hurricanes and not supposed to happen again, whenever the wind blows, Steven Johnson hears the death whistling, his adrenaline level rises sharply and heart begins to beat strongly. Part of his brain, the rational involved usually in decision making, knows that windows are secure, but another part of the brain, the emotional, wants to run anywhere to escape danger, not reasoning, but acts. There is a good reason why evolution has built our brain so. A primate that lives in the jungle and is attacked by a lion, it makes sense to develop fear lions, or at least be afraid lions, more than any other animal. Human goes through many similar situations, but it's not lions, but about situation that most often does not repeat at regular intervals, such as the emergence lion that might eat him. In terms of risk-benefit, it is a good compromise on the part of our brain, and there is a big difference between when the body's defense mechanism works by developing antibodies, after being exposed to avian influence. In both cases, the body says this happened once, it's likely to happen again, and when that happens, I'll be ready. Unfortunately, a part of the brain that manages the emotion of fears is unable to balance its side, as does the immune system. While the body can develop antibodies for hundreds of infections, and these antibodies can fluctuate throughout the circulatory system awaiting the attack of the same disease, it's difficult for the brain to predict and build a variety of fears that follow us through the whole life. The second fundamental problem is that the analytical system, neocortex brain, is so new that it still has some rough in evolutionary terms. Psychologist Daniel Gilbert explained everything very well. Brain is a great car that constantly monitoring the environment and seeking things to locate where is the individual. The brain has acted such for several 100 million years, and then back with only a few million years mammalian brain learned a new trick, namely to predict the time and location of dangers before they happen in reality. Our ability to predict something that has not come true is one of the most amazing innovations of our brain. But this innovation is only in the early stages of its development, and we have a lot to discover in the future about this human capacity. Brain reaction to danger has a main component, namely the fear that the central element involved. An individual may feel fear for many reasons. When you see a horror movie, or when there is a danger in a special situation, or even while receiving criticism. If the emotion of fear is extremely important and we live human life with this emotion, we survive. If the emotion of fear is extremely important, we humans live this emotion, we survive, because otherwise we cross the street without paying attention, can get other pathological attributes such as phobia, anxiety, or panic attacks frightening. So, fear is considered negative. Indeed, predominantly it is a very positive feature. Fear is a warning sign that it triggers the brain to protect us and take care of our safety. If we feel fear in face of danger and therefore we did not perceive, we act irresponsible. Fear is therefore an addition to responsibility that each of us has to prevent danger. Because in general, emergency dispatchers, frontline intervention staff meet very often especially with the emotion of fear. I will detail below some aspects of it. Does it look familiar? Such an episode, you are afraid, your heart beats faster, breathing hard, wind in your face, you're trembling, lips and feet, muscle tighten. All this prepare you to run and genetically programmed behavior designed to move away from danger. If fear is too intense, you sock your feet, relax speech nerves, your stomach hurts, you froze. Are symptoms that accompany fears, showing that both body and brain are prepared to defend against danger, to fight or to remove it. Ledoux believed that flee in face of danger because reaction of fear does not appear conscious. Recognition of emotional stimulus or evaluation have different places in the brain that assess risk before being recognized. So, in front of danger, in the first moment we do not know the reason why we run or do it such. It probably happened to you to go away from some places and do not understand why you did it. The brain just anticipated danger. Unfortunately, often the danger may be associated with an event in the life of each of us that is no longer valid in the present situation, in which case panic occurs. In other words, panic is a fear for a non-existent threat that exists only in the mind of the person who feels fear. An example would be a child with a very authoritarian father who frequently was beaten. During adulthood it has an example would be a child with a very authoritarian father who frequently was beaten. During adulthood, is to have an unexplained fear whenever interacting with authority. A policeman asks for a document. A severe teacher is to a trigger of an unconscious panic attack, precisely that combination that makes the brain relate to what happened in childhood. Fear is an emotion primarily genetically programmed at birth, and then outreaction occurred due to previous experience of lived distress, or may arise from beliefs. Fear of going under a ladder to get out of house while left wood as first step, or may arise from unconscious defensive strategies created by the brain to prevent awareness of an impulse or a plan to conscious rejects. What happens in the brains when a person is afraid or will live the experience of danger? Besides fear is an emotion, it's an instinct to preserve the biological role of the human race. Our brain stores memories of events which cause fear just to protect us from dangers, more or less similar, that may arise in the future. As mentioned above, the part of brains that triggers the instinct is the amygdala, which looks like a nut, to assess whether a situation is dangerous or not. If the situation is dangerous, it alarms fear and consequently the subsequent reaction in our body. What I want to specify and consider it of major importance is that the same reaction can be triggered and can occur when the person is not involved directly, but indirectly by the phone to 112 dispatcher, fireman in front of fire, contact with the victim for medical emergency or extrication staff. When a person is faced with a situation where fear arises as said above, the heart begins to beat stronger, agitation appears, hair rises, sweating occurs. These symptoms may occur with staff involved in emergency situation. It's important that staff understand that the system. It's important that staff understand that the symptoms are real, rising because it's the way we are, because it's natural. Does not mean the dispatcher has any healthy problems. Each of these signals has a specific motivation. The feeling of fear is therefore triggered by external stimuli, visual or auditory, and what happens inside our body is very intense and deep. Brain area involved in living the emotion of fear has been linked to the amygdala, which is activated in response to external stimuli and sends alarm promptly to other areas neural, preparing the body to react, usually choosing how to run or attack. Surely modern man does not run away or fight if perceived danger, but uses other type of events related to body language or paraverbal. Many diseases are related to this function of the mechanism involved in the perception of fear. For example, PTSD, stress or panic, if the panic button is pressed repeatedly even when there is nothing for the individual to fear. But the amygdala is not the only one active in the process of emotion of fear. Whammy, an associate professor of psychiatry, and colleagues who published their study in Nature Neuroscience found that by studying a patient, MS, a woman of 40 years who suffered from teenage or back with a disease, amygdala does not work and therefore felt no fear. She was protagonist for scientists in their search for a long period of time. It was noted that when the woman breathed a mixture of air with certain levels of CO2, which caused choking about 30 seconds, she reacted as in the event of panic, a result that surprised researchers who expected the opposite. But how it's possible for women and other people with similar injuries who have no reaction while facing a robbery, a horror movement, or threatened by a gun, feel terror inhalation of carbon dioxide? The answer seems to be given the existence of a mechanism by which the brain reacts to foreign or domestic situations, such as feeling heart attack or breathlessness, getting into panic. Wen and colleagues suggest that this feeling of panic internal are captured by different deep areas such as the brainstem, limbic system, and insular cortex, activating a different circuit than the circuit activated by fear of snakes or thieves. The same test was repeated, inhalation of CO2 gas in 12 healthy subjects, but only 3 of them have experienced similar feelings of panic. So, there is a deeper and intense fear dictated by internal stimuli, say scientists, and suppress this area of amygdala in healthy subjects. At the same time, the researchers say that the amygdala does not work properly in people who suffer from panic attack. The brain has evolved emotional state which shall tell us much about the relationship between thinking and feeling. Emotional brain existed long before the brain used to be rational. The earliest roots of our terms of an emotional experience are the sense of smell for the olfactory lobe. Reptiles, birds, amphibian, and fishes region of the brain involved in the sense of smell is the highest region of brain. In fact, the sense of smell was of fundamental importance in terms of survival. Olfactory center is composed of a thin layer of neurons, which includes the olfactory stimuli, main categories of classification or the enemy, or the potential for the food mass, or sexual, available or unavailable, or edible or poisonous. A second layer of sense sent through the nervous system reflex messages to inform the body what to do to get closer, to evacuate, pursue, eat, spit. Since for olfactory stimuli they have become less important in the development of this system over their roles. This part of the brain involved emotional reaction, which specifically deal with the 4 functions of survival: nutrition, fight, flee, reproduction, or specific emotions: anger, fear, pleasure, disgust, desire. When this part of the brain evolved, it perfected 2 other instruments: learning and memory. This allowed an animal to be smarter in its choices for survival. There was then the neocortex, and it links with the primitive brain, so that, for example, mother-child relationship, a human development which is based on long-term commitment needed to bring children into the world, specifically the human species. In fact, non-neocortex species, such as reptiles, lack maternal affection when chicks hatch. They have to go underground to avoid being devoured by their parents. In humans, the bond between parent and child protection, which allows much of maturation of the nervous system, is still developing during childhood. When the neocortex max increases, it's observed along with this increase in geometric progression, multiplication of the interconnection of brain circuits. The number of such connections is higher, the greater the range of possible answers. The neocortex makes possible also subtlety and complexity of emotional life. In primates, interconnection between the neocortex and the limbic system are improved compared to other species. Man is maximum. This emotional center gives immense power to influence the operation of all areas of the brain, including the center of thought. Therefore, especially in emergency dispatcher job, emotional expression is very important. Negative emotions should not remain stored within the body when faced with danger, indirectly told by his color. Emotional expression is performed using motion detection that you can stand up from a chair, move, walk into the room. In this lesson, there is a chapter on managing stress and emotion and how they can be expressed. It's good to note that this brain mechanism may come into action in emergency dispatcher, and actually emotional center is influenced decisions quickly. The limbic system is the brain part that helps maintain homeostasis. In absence of a limbic system, you should have cold blood. In absence of the limbic system, you should have cold blood as reptiles. We are humans with the limbic system. We adjust our internal state to maintain a constant temperature regardless of external condition of heat and cold. A person in coma while losing the temporary use of this part or the neocortex, which are necessary to respond to external stimuli and interact with the outside world, continues to live because the limbic system maintains and regulates the body's vital functions. The hypothalamus is probably the most important part of the limbic system, the most complex and unique and amazing brain itself. It's the size of a pea and weighs about 4 grams. The hypothalamus controls the body's homeostatic mechanism through feedback. For example, the body temperature is controlled by controlling the temperature of blood by hypothalamus. If the blood becomes too cold, the hypothalamus responds by stimulating the production processes and conservation of body heat. If the blood is too hot, the thermal processes stimulate dispersion. So, hypothalamus contributes indirectly to control the operation of each cell in the body. Also plays a key role in the control of wakefulness and alert mechanism, and is an essential mechanism for regulating appetite and the amount of food ingested. Hypothalamus functions as the regulator and coordinator of the hypothalamus functions as the regulator blah blah blah.